We did not talk to Colin for years while he was in the facility. We didn't even know where he was. Why my mom would do that to one of our siblings, her own kid. That is like a really dark part of our past.
For nearly a decade, millions of people invited the Gosselin family into their living rooms every week. 8 kids, one impossibly busy mother, one good-natured father trying to keep up, and a camera crew that never seemed to blink. It was television built on chaos and cuteness, the kind of show people watched after a long day because it made ordinary parenting struggles look almost charming by comparison. Nobody watching at home in 2007 imagined that the version of events they were seeing was only ever half the story. They certainly didn't imagine that one of the children at the center of it all would grow up, sit in front of a different camera as a young adult, and describe a household that looked nothing like the one America thought it knew. That child was Hannah Gosselin, and what she eventually said, alongside her brother Colin, didn't just complicate the legacy of a beloved reality show. It cracked it open. Hannah was born in May 2004, one of 6 sextuplets delivered to Jon and Kate Gosselin, joining their older twin daughters to make a household of 8 children under one roof. 3 years later, TLC turned that household into Jon and Kate plus 8. And Hannah's entire frame of reference for childhood became inseparable from being filmed. She wasn't old enough to remember a version of her life before the cameras arrived, which meant she also wasn't old enough to know that most children get to have private moments their parents never intend to broadcast. The show that aired was warm and tidy by design. Kate was the exacting, endlessly capable mother, holding it all together. Jon was the affable dad a half step behind. The kids were photogenic and rambunctious in ways that read as adorable rather than alarming. Audiences loved it, and the family became a genuine cultural fixture. Magazine covers, talk show appearances, the kind of attention usually reserved for actors rather than parents of multiples from Pennsylvania. What that polished footage didn't show, according to the children who lived inside it, was the machinery running underneath. And as Hannah and Colin got older, they started describing that machinery in detail. Hannah didn't rush to a microphone the moment she turned 18. For years, she stayed largely outside the public conversation about her family, even as tabloids continued treating the Gosselins as an ongoing storyline. When she did start speaking publicly, it came through a 2023 episode of Vice TV's documentary series, Dark Side of the 2000s, which revisited Jon and Kate plus 8, with input from people connected to the show. What Hannah described wasn't a list of dramatic accusations. It was something quieter and, in its own way, more unsettling pattern. She talked about her brother Colin being treated differently from the rest of the children in ways that were obvious even to kids too young to articulate why. She said Colin wouldn't get to come outside and play with his siblings. She said he ate at different times than the rest of the family. It wasn't framed as one bad week or one harsh punishment. It was framed as the texture of daily life, that detail that Colin simply wasn't present for the ordinary rhythms of family life. Dinner, outdoor play, the small shared moments siblings take for granted, became the thread that connected Hannah's account to a much larger and more disturbing story her brother would tell himself. If Hannah cracked the door open, Colin kicked it down. In September 2024, he sat down with the U.S. Sun and described something that went far beyond strict parenting. According to Colin, his mother had a room built in an unfinished section of the home's basement. He called it, by his own words, a containment room. It had a small window, a mattress on the floor, cameras inside it, and a bolt lock fitted to the outside of the door, meaning whoever was inside couldn't let themselves out. Colin alleged he was placed there repeatedly, sometimes with his hands and feet zip-tied, the door bolted shut, the lights turned off, while a camera kept watching him from somewhere in the room. He said this began around age 8 or 9 and continued for years. He said he eventually stopped attending school. He described his mother as becoming physically and verbally aggressive at times, and said he felt singled out, a sibling treated as the source of the family's problems rather than a child who needed support. At 12, Colin was placed in a residential facility, a placement Kate has described as medically necessary given his documented behavioral and psychiatric challenges. He stayed there for roughly 2 years. According to Jon, he only learned the full scope of what Colin had experienced once he gained legal custody and started hearing directly from the people treating him, Details that, in Jon's words, matched what Hannah had already told him. Jon didn't just take his son's word for it from a distance. He told the U.S. Sun that the family who bought the Gosselins' old house had asked him, unprompted, why there was a room in the basement with a bed and a lock on the outside. For Jon, that was confirmation that the room Colin and Hannah had described actually existed, sitting quietly in a house that had since changed hands, a physical leftover of something the show never aired. Colin's account didn't end with that 2024 interview. In 2025, he announced a memoir, In the Shadow of 8, Surviving the Reality of My Childhood, set to dig further into what he's described as years of being filmed while the most important parts of his life were kept off camera. In the announcement, he said the book would address what he called a basement cell, along with psychiatric medication he says was given to him at 11 years old. He's framed the project not as an attempt to relitigate his childhood publicly, but as an effort to find his own voice after years of having his story told by other people, headlines, and the editing decisions of a network. Earlier that same year, Colin also said his time pursuing a military career had ended abruptly. He told Entertainment Tonight he was discharged shortly before completing training, after the institution where he'd once stayed as a minor came up during a background check. It's a detail that underscores how long the consequences of that period in his life have followed him, well past childhood and into the early years of his adult independence. The shift that eventually let Hannah and Colin speak as freely as they have started years earlier, in 2018, with a custody change that reshaped the entire family. Hannah, then a young teenager, had been spending increasing amounts of time at her father's home and grew visibly reluctant to return to her mother's house. Jon has said he noticed her becoming anxious and guarded in ways that worried him, and that the longer she stayed with him, the more that guardedness eased. Eventually, Hannah told him plainly that she didn't want to go back. Jon pursued and was granted custody. Shortly after, Colin was released from a facility and joined Jon and Hannah in their father's home. For the first time, 2 of the 8 Gosselin children were living outside their mother's household, and the family that television audiences had watched as a single unit for years was now visibly split. Hannah has described her life with her father in plain, almost understated terms. She's called it normal, given everything that came before it. That word is doing a lot of work. No production schedule, no cameras built into the walls, just the ordinary, unremarkable texture of being a teenager, which for her wasn't ordinary at all until that point. Kate has not stayed silent in the face of these allegations, though her responses have generally come through representatives rather than lengthy personal statements. After Colin's 2023 comments on Vice's documentary, Kate firmly denied the abuse allegations. Following his more detailed 2024 interview, she described his account of her parenting as stemming from what she called his distorted perception of reality, pointing to his documented psychiatric history as context for why she believed his memories were unreliable. Her attorney, Richard Puello, was more direct in a statement to Fox News, saying Kate didn't believe she had intentionally harmed any of her children, and noting that, given how publicly visible the family had always been, any genuine abuse would likely have drawn the attention of authorities. He also suggested the full picture was more complicated than the allegations alone conveyed. Kate's older daughter, Maddie, also weighed in publicly after the Vice documentary aired, pushing back on the idea that Colin's experience should simply be excused as childhood trauma, and noting that she, too, had been a child living through the same household dynamics. It's a reminder that the Gosselin children don't speak with one voice on any of this. Some have aligned with Kate. Others, like Hannah and Colin, have not. The family's public position, by this point, is openly fractured. By the time she graduated high school in 2023, Hannah was already building an identity separate from the family brand that had shaped her since infancy. She launched her own skincare venture under her recognizable last name. She's appeared publicly with her father in ways that read as genuinely easy rather than staged, including a joint television appearance where they discussed a shared weight loss journey. The distance between the anxious young teenager Jon described in 2018 and the young woman navigating early adulthood now is, by most accounts, substantial. Her relationship with her mother hasn't resolved into anything simple. It isn't full estrangement, and it isn't reconciliation either. It's something more careful than both of those, an ongoing, unfinished process of figuring out how to hold a relationship with someone who, in her own account and her brother's, caused real harm, while still acknowledging that person as her mother. That kind of complexity doesn't make for a clean ending, but it's an honest one. Her bond with her siblings has shifted too. Custody split the 8 children, in effect, into 2 camps, and the closeness that defined them on screen as young kids gave way to something more uneven. Hannah has maintained a meaningful connection with her sister Leah, in particular, even as other relationships within the family have grown more distant or more strained. What makes Hannah and Colin's accounts significant isn't just the specific details, serious as those are. It's what they represent in a much bigger conversation about reality television and the children who grew up inside it without ever being able to consent to the cameras that defined their childhood. A generation of kids who appeared on family format reality shows in the 2000s and 2010s are adults now, and many of them are starting to describe what their lives actually looked like once the editing stopped and the story being sold to audiences fell away. Hannah didn't choose to grow up on television. She didn't choose to have her childhood packaged into something millions of strangers would watch and feel good about. What she has chosen, as an adult, is to describe what that childhood actually contained, carefully, specifically, and without the performance that defined so much of her early life. Whatever comes next for her relationship with her mother, that act of speaking plainly about her own experience is hers, and nobody gets to edit it out.